is Shai Schmelzer. I'm part of the Oracle Visual Builder Cloud Service team. And in this demonstration, we'll show you some advanced techniques that you can apply to tables in your pages. So in this demonstration, we'll show you how to work with a table component in your page. One thing to note is that our UI expert recommend that you would use the list component when possible. This is a bit of a more modern UI for your application and used very commonly in most of the web applications today, as well as mobile application. But in case you still want to work with a table, what you're going to do is you're going to pick up a table, put it on the page, and then bind it to data, selecting the columns you want to show. Note that you can rearrange the order of the columns inside this wizard just by dragging and dropping them. Once you click Finish, the table would show up on your page. Now the table itself has a bunch of properties that you can set. Okay, so this is the default look and feel, but you can modify it using things like enabling grid layout and hiding and showing the specific lines that separates the columns. So all of this is controlled from the properties of the table. Next, we're going to show you how to replace the content in one of the fields. So in here we have a photo field, and what we're doing is we're dragging over an avatar on top of this column. Okay, so this replaces the content in the column, but we can still bind the source of this avatar to the value in that column. And this would get us the actual image to show up in this field. Now if you want to rearrange the columns in the table after you are done with the wizard, you can easily do it by going to the Data tab and moving the columns around. So this is again in the properties of the table. Okay, so now we have the table as the first column. Next, we're going to modify the date field, which shows with a format that doesn't match what we want to show. To do that, we're going to drag and drop an input text onto the field. Note that we're dropping it onto the field and not next to the field. And then it just replaces the current field. It even picks up the correct value and shows us that value over here. There's one property called the converter that allows you to change the format of the date that is shown in this field. Right, so now that we have those columns, we can also visualize data in a column. So for example, we have the cost column. We can use one of our gauge component and just drop it on that column. Okay. So again, make sure to drop it on the column, and it will just pick up the existing value and show it in a visual way. Now the default values of the gauge component, the data ranges from 0 to 100, and in our case there are more than 100 in the value. So let's update this to reflect a new value, and then you can see it in a more meaningful way. Next thing you might want to do is customize, for example, the color of the gauge. And of course you can work with all the rest of the properties of the gauge to achieve the UI you're aiming for. So this is a little bit more of a visualized table of data in our application with the right format and order of columns as we want. Next, we're going to show you that you can add behaviors to the table. The first one is the ability to drag and drop columns in the table. So this is done by modifying this property. Okay, and you can see the default values in there, and you can of course override them to allow, for example, to enable drag and drop and reordering of the columns. Once you do this, if you switch to live mode, you'll be able to take columns, click on them, and then just move them around. So this is the first behavior you can turn on the table. Another behavior that you might want to turn on the table deals with resizing columns. So if you click this little pencil, you'll actually see the definition of the code for each one of the columns, and then you can go into that and modify it. So in our case, we're going to go to the name column and add one more property for that column called resizable, and again enable it. And as you can see, we're doing it for a specific column in our table. Once we do it, again, if we're in live mode, and we'll see the data in the table, we can stand on the edge of the column and just drag and drop it to resize it. For example, like that. Now, one thing that you can see now is that when we resize it, our values might get cut off. This might also happen, for example, if you have a very long value in a column, even without resizing. So let's next see how to resolve this situation and allow word wrap on this. To do this, you'll go into the properties of the specific column, and in the style, you're going to add white space normal for the specific column. Once you do this, when you resize the column, if the content doesn't fit in one line, it would wrap to the next line. Note that you can set the same properties also for the header. Next thing we're going to see is how to limit the size of a table. For example, set the height for the table to a specific height. And we're going to do this specifically to show you how to enable fetch operations on the table. So right now, we're fetching all the columns all the rows in the table in one go. In some cases, if you have a lot of rows, you might want to enable pagination or fetch as needed. To do that, you're going to set the scroll policy to load more on scroll, and then control the scroll options by specifying values here for the fetch size and also possibly for the max count. So in our case, we're going to set a fetch size that is pretty small, just so you'll be able to see the behavior because we don't have a lot of records. So we'll do a fetch size of, let's say instead of 25, actually, let's do something like 3. Okay, so now look at the behavior at runtime. Initially we see records, but as we scroll down, you can see the little wait icon as we fetch more records. So every time that we pass the next third record, we're fetching more. So this is a way for you to control the behavior of how many records are passed to the client, and it can help you improve the performance of your table. Next thing we're going to see is how to add another column to the table. So what happens if there's a new column that we want to show in the table from our data source? So our table is based on a service data provider. This is what was created by the wizard. And the service data provider is based on a specific data type. Okay, in the current version of VBCS, this data type is being created at the flow level. In upcoming version, it might change to be in a page level. In any case, in our situation, we're going to go over to the data type that was created by the wizard. Right? So the quick start created this data type based on the field that we chose. The new add column from endpoint allows us to pick up another column and add it to this data type. Right? So we just did the edit from endpoint and added a new column to the data type, which automatically would change our service data provider, which means that we can now go over and by clicking on this table icon, add this new column to our table. Okay, and we can see the values in here. Another thing that we can do is we can also add empty columns. Okay, so those are columns where we can add other things, and of course we can show and hide columns as we like. Okay, so let's add another empty column to show you how to add, for example, a behavior for a specific row. Okay, so we're going to set the title for this new column, and we'll call it info. Okay, and into this column we're going to drop a hyperlink. We can then go over and set properties for the hyperlink. And we need to switch to design mode. We can set the title to say, for example, info or more info. We can say which target we want to open, okay, and then specify the URL. We're going to look up the specific person on Wikipedia, and to do that we're going to first pick up the specific row value, so this would be their name, and then before that name we're going to concatenate the URL from Wikipedia. Okay, so put in the URL inside quotes, add a plus sign, and now when you run the application, you'll be able to see a table of the various people in your database, along with a more info column at the end. And when you select a record, click more info, you'll get the information in a Wikipedia page next. So those were some of the tricks that you can do with a table component when you're developing with Visual Builder Cloud Service.